And welcome back. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome a panel of Black lawmakers and community leaders. They'll share their reflections on Juneteenth, the state of racial equity in Connecticut and in the nation. Tonight, we'd like to welcome Corrie Betts, the Criminal Justice Chair of the Connecticut State NAACP, YWCA President Adrienne Cochrane, State Representative Brandon McGee, the Reverend Alvan Johnson, a retired pastor from the Bethel AME Church in Bloomfield, and Congresswoman Jahana Hayes. Thank you all for joining us tonight. What an honor to have you all here. The first question for you, Congresswoman Hayes. Juneteenth is not a federal holiday, despite all of what our audience has seen tonight. Why is that, and are there any plans to change it?
Actually, this is a very timely program because right before we began, the Senate just voted and approved the measure that the House had voted on and brought it through. So when you ask the question, why is this happening? Why has it taken so long? It's because, like everything else, representation matters. So we had a Congress who put this bill on the floor in the House, and we overwhelmingly approved it, and it went to the Senate. And less than an hour ago, the Senate just approved it. So very shortly, it will be going to the president's desk to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And I have a tremendous amount of confidence that it will be signed into law. But just quickly, I mean, in last Congress in the 116, we voted on an Emmett Till anti-lynching bill to make lynching a federal crime. So all of these things that had failed over and over in the Congress was because of who was at the table at these times. So it just underscores that idea that representation matters, and it has to be important enough to the legislators who are in office to move these types of bills along.
Now, Representative McGee, Juneteenth is recognized in Connecticut. When did that happen, and tell us how?
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I first of all want to thank Representative Hayes for Congresswoman, Hayes, for all of her support on the federal level. Here in Connecticut in 2003, the Connecticut General Assembly approved a bill that was signed into law designating the Saturday closest to June 19th of each year as Juneteenth, Independence Day. So although it's not recognized as a state holiday, and I'm so encouraged that soon things will be trickling down from the federal level, we still celebrate or observe what we're calling Black Independence Day here in the state of Connecticut. But as you can imagine, we are hopeful that one of these sessions we will approve a bill that would support making it a national or statewide holiday, allowing for many of our state employees to give back to their communities.
Now, Corrie, as far as the legal front is concerned, what are some of the battles that you are seeing that have been fought when it comes to combating anti-Black racism?
Oh, wow. Actually, going on right now here in Connecticut, Amazon had 8 nooses that were found on their site. So we're still dealing with those racist acts here and now in the backyards of our state. So, you know, that's one major thing for sure, if I must say.
Now, Adrienne, on the social front, what are some of the tools that an organization like yours needs in order to continue to make this a more equitable playing field for Black folks?
Well, again, and I couldn't agree more with Representative Hayes when she said representation matters. And I think as we continue to make sure that, number one, that we are electing officials that are representing us and are standing up for those things that are right, and also that we're involved as social services organizations in doing our work to help educate people, because so much is about the education, things that aren't taught in school, things that aren't a part of sort of that anecdotal history in households, people don't know. And so the idea that we advocate to assure that these types of things are happening. I'd like to share quickly a really interesting article I accidentally came across, and it talked about a different twist on Juneteenth. And this is a perfect example of how even celebrations like this, the attempts to sort of whitewash them and to turn it into something else. So there's a plantation, happens to be in North Carolina, called the Latta Plantation. And I want to share with you that what their plans are for Juneteenth is that they're going to show how white refugees were displaced as a result of Juneteenth. And the advertisement says, come out to the historic Latta Plantation for a one-night event, Saturday, June 19th, actually 2021. You will hear stories from the massa himself, who is now living in the woods. And they went on to emphasize that this program is going to focus on how whites were displaced as a result of this. So this type of thing happening, it's going to continue to happen. It has been happening. What we have to do is make sure that we combat this with truth. We combat this with facts. We combat this by refusing to stand down or step away or to be afraid to speak up to say, no, there's a problem with this. This is wrong. So that's how I see the role of the YWCA Hartford region, as well as our other sister and brother organizations taking a very front seat role.
Now, Reverend John, you've been a pillar of this community for quite some time. What personal reflections do you have about really not just your experience, but how Connecticut has been handling these issues?
Well, one of the things that's absolutely critical for us to understand is that education leads to liberation. And one person said, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And it's because the slaves in Texas didn't know they were free. They behaved as though they were still enslaved. Until we as a people, and until the rest of the state, until we understand that we are free, liberated, then we will begin to behave that way. And it's all of these new pieces of legislation talking about we can't teach anything that will make somebody uncomfortable. Well, the bottom line is, if you have an inferior education, you should be uncomfortable. We need to teach people the truth, the whole truth, and Sister Adrienne, nothing but the truth.
Now, Corrie, I want to come back to you because along those lines, there are a lot of folks that are not Black that may be watching this special or that you come across in your work, and they go, well, this doesn't really apply to me. I don't really understand how I see myself here. What would your response be to those people?
I have these conversations and, unfortunately, we deal with people who are somewhat, have those microaggressions, whereas though, I was talking to a friend last night, and you have individuals who say, well, I have a Black friend. I'm not racist. And my thought is, when you make those type statements, you're letting me know that you are racist. And you have to acknowledge that and be willing to having those courageous conversations of saying, well, when you say these type things, right, these are the things that may offend a Black person. So having and being willing to go into those spaces of having those courageous conversations. And I think sometimes we don't want to do that, right? And for those who are looking, like Pastor Johnson said, they're uncomfortable in having these conversations, whereas though we have to have these conversations so that things can turn and it don't have to continue to be the way that it is.
Now, Congresswoman, to get to your post, you had to have gone through immense challenges, both as a Black person and as a Black woman. What would you say to those who are looking at you and saying, I want to be you as Congresswoman one day?
Well, just really quickly before I even talk about that, because I am a Congresswoman, but at my heart and my core, I'm a teacher. That's who I am. So I commend the state of Connecticut for, we talk about education, but for moving the teaching of African American and Hispanic American history as part of the curriculum, a required part of the curriculum. I taught African American history in the Waterbury public school system, but I had to literally almost petition the board to have this happen, to go to the supervisor, to get permission write the curriculum and teach this class. And when you're talking about education, so many of my students weren't even aware of Juneteenth or the significance of it. And when we're talking about uncomfortable conversations, think about how uncomfortable it is as the only African-American person in the history department. And I'm having a conversation in a majority minority setting about slavery, teaching kids about that. So we have to diversify the educators that we are putting in front of our kids. We have to make our curriculum more inclusive, but the level of comfort doesn't change people's history. So all of those things just are so important that we give our kids all of the information and teach them how to critically analyze it, but not whitewash it or omit it or change anything. As far as my role in Congress, I didn't even realize that I was going to be the first African-American woman or the first African-American Democrat ever to represent the state of Connecticut. I had never thought about it. I think I had just accepted that I had always just been represented by just a very monolithic group of people. Not to say that there was anything good or bad about it. I just hadn't thought about it. So when I first saw that headline, I remember the sting of it because I thought, oh, this might be a problem. But as I got more involved and really got into the journey to Congress, I realized that there were so many areas where I was going to have to break that barrier. There were so many things and so many perspectives where the lens through which I viewed the world was very different, and there was no blueprint for that. But the thing I will say, to your point of people who look at me and say, I can do that, you're absolutely right. You can do this, because the traditionally accepted norms or that checklist of what you're supposed to do to get here, I can tell you that it is not an all-inclusive checklist, and it is not the standard bearer. This is the people's house, and every person should be able to find someone that they identify with in this house. And there is no one singular way of being and doing. So for me, I learned that it was almost like baptism by fire. But as I'm here and holding the door open, I want everybody to recognize the value in what they bring to this conversation and the significance of their uniqueness and what makes them different and what is different than everybody else that's already here, and just go for it, because there is no singular way of doing this.
Congresswoman Hayes, Reverend Johnson, Mr. Betts, Ms. Johnson, thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.